Well, joining us now is Abdulaziz Almashi, the co-founder of Syria Solidarity campaign and solidarity with refugees. He's also a Syrian refugee himself and was granted asylum in 2013. Also with us, John McHugo, author of Syria, A Recent History. Hello to you, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Abdulaziz, first of all, if I may, heartbreaking doesn't even begin to express what we have seen in the reports that we've been covering here on Sky News this afternoon. What emotions do you feel when you see what's being recorded?
Well, I can't really describe how I feel about it, because this is not something new. We have been seeing this since 2011. The Assad regime, with the help of his allies, have been committing war crimes against the Syrian people right since 2011, and the international community didn't do anything to stop him from doing that. And every time I feel the situation won't get worse, it does. This is the problem. Every time we say, okay, look, this is the worst of it, the next day it's even worse. And you can see like the political talks all the time, but this is not stopping the bloodshed. Yesterday, so many people killed. The day before, today, like every single hour, we have people being slaughtered in Syria.
What was the situation like when you left, and what was it that triggered you deciding to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, I left Syria before the conflict. I came to the UK back in 2009. But I am.
But what triggered that for you? Why did you?
I came to study. I came before the conflict started. I came to do my postgraduate studies. But like since the start of the revolution, I became politically active because I inspired by the democratic movements within the Middle East. And then I thought, okay, it is a chance maybe for the Syrian people to liberate themselves from a dictatorial regime that has been in power since 1970. And because of my political activities, I couldn't go back home, and then I became wanted by the Syrian government. And I am in touch with people on the ground on a daily basis, and they...
What did they say? What did they tell you?
They tell me what is going on in Syria. Like,
and what is that?
It is like slaughters. There's like hospitals have been targeted, mosques, even churches. You have like busy markets, even like humanitarian aid convoys. No one is exceptional in Syria. There's indiscriminate bombardment targeting civilians and hospitals on a daily basis. All of these are war crimes, and again, the international law has been violated. Okay. And the silence, like I told us, from the international.
Let's bring in John McHugo, should we? Hi, John. Desperate times, as we were saying. Through the eyes of a historian, how did Syria find herself in the position that she's in today?
Well, it's a long story. We should make one thing very clear at the outset, and that is that there has been a struggle for democracy and what we would call secular activism throughout modern Syrian history, going back to the turn of the 20th century. Unfortunately, as Abdulaziz said, a dictatorship came to power in 1970, and there were reasons why it came to power, but it has had two weapons that it has used. One is repression, the other is patronage. And this means that people who follow the regime get treated well. And unfortunately, this has meant that a disproportionate number of people close to the presidential family, who tend to come from the same religious minority sect, have been promoted and basically are controlling a lot of Syria today. Now, the difficulty is that although Syria is a very strongly secular state, it's the only Arab state where your religion is not put on your ID card. Because democracy has been put in the deep freeze, opposition movements have sometimes had to resort to religious-based politics. And that has obscured something, because when the revolution started in 2011, it was completely secular. People were not agitating for religion to come into politics. They were agitating for democracy, an end to corruption, repeal of the emergency law, which removed the security forces from all accountability, And this went back to 1963. You know, this had been the state since 1963. So we had a very corrupt and a very repressive regime which was not able to meet the demands of its people. And that is what finally exploded in 2011 onwards.
Yes, I strongly agree with you, John, because if you look at Syria and the history of Syria, like Muslims, the Christians, Kurds,
Absolutely.
and Arabs and other minorities
Absolutely.
have lived together more than 1400 years in peace.
I know.
We have never had any kind of a sectarian strife or a civil war.
Absolutely.
What people wanted, they came down to the street demanding for freedom, reforms, and they didn't even ask for the trouble of the regime at the first place.
Absolutely.
But because the regime went far away, if using his armed forces to crush peaceful protesters, then the people said, look, you have no future in Syria. And that's what the people wanted. It is a very legitimate demand from the people of Syria. The dictator crossed all the lines, and again, the international community didn't do anything to stop him, despite the fact he used chemical weapons and guided bombs to target residential areas, targeting hospitals and busy markets. And you look at a permanent member of the UN Security Council, like the Russians, who are aiding him financially, militarily, and politically. They use the veto so many times in the UN Security Council, and they are fighting for his battles. They are committing war crimes in Syria, and the UN Security Council again failed to uphold the international law.
Well, I would agree with that. I would also make one other little observation about Muslims and Christians. As Syrian friends tell me very often, they did not know what the religion of their work colleagues was before the revolution. And what has sadly changed, and what is the big problem now, is that Syria has become a proxy war. What does Russia think it is doing? It's in Syria for its own interests. And at the same time, you have Iran and Saudi Arabia both backing different factions. There's been quite a bit of chaos among the opposition. There was a wonderful man, Muaz al-Khatib, who I think was the best hope the Syrian opposition ever had. And he was actually an imam. Someone would I mean, we talk about Islamists, but we should also remember there are Muslim Democrats like Rashid al-Ghanouchi in Tunisia. And he was someone who was, although he was an imam, he was welcomed by Muslims and Christians and feminists like Rana Kabani. And he resigned. Why? Because he said that the United States, Saudi Arabia and Qatar were all backing different opposition factions. They were all playing their own game in Syria. And all these outside powers have been playing their own game at the expense of Syrian lives.
But too simplistic there, wouldn't it, to say remove Assad and all will be well?
Absolutely, because this is the main objective for the Syrian revolution. And if you go to Syria and if you ask people, like the priority in Syria is to remove Assad. When we get rid of Assad, and then we will get rid of ISIS. ISIS is a symptom of a disease called Assad. And in Syria, the Syrian people, when they started the revolution, they didn't want to replace a dictatorial regime with a fanatical ideology like ISIS. So this is something we will never have in the future. So Assad killed like at least 10,000 times as ISIS did. And that's why the priority for the Syrian people is Assad, who is committing like atrocities against the humanity in Syria.
Could I add something to that?
Please.
Which is that we should distinguish between Assad and the Syrian state. The Syrian state, the law courts are still functioning, the hospitals are still functioning, the electricity is up to a point still functioning in the areas held by the regime. Somehow we must find a way to remove Assad from the top. And that is why I think negotiations between the outside powers who are interfering in Syria are so important, because it's in no one's interest for this to continue. And there are other figures in Syria who could lead the country without demolishing the state. And if the state collapses, the chaos will be 100 times worse than it is now.
Gentlemen, we could speak for much longer, but sadly we're out of time. We appreciate you taking the time to join us on Sky News this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. So here at Sky News today, we are holding up a mirror to try to illustrate for you what's happening in Aleppo, the suffering that is continuing on a daily basis. We're asking the question, what are politicians doing about it? Stay tuned for more.